Rachel, welcome
Patrick,
back. How are you?
excellent. How are you doing?
Good, man. Happy Friday. So we've had a nice little technical difficulty start here today. So who knows how long we'll go? But we do have one question that I want to get in, and it is not we're not going to have a lot of time to be beneficial for this question, but because by the time this comes out, the old holidays are going to be close to over. But I have a question that says, Patrick, you frequently talk about this time of the year being the most stressful for people. I think part of that is gift giving. Do you guys have any historical gifts you've received that might be helpful for us this year?
I do. Do you want to answer first or me?
I'll answer first, sure.
All right, go ahead.
Mine won't be helpful at all.
All right.
I only really remember one gift that I ever got, and it was I was very young, and it was called Mr. Game Show, and it was this like animatronic game show host that lets you play like a game show board game and pick out anything you want at Toys R Us, and like that's gonna be yours. And it happened, and I got Mr. Game Show.
That's amazing, right? This childhood memories. It's good
I
stuff.
don't know if that's going to be helpful for anyone, but if you want to find a retro gift, that's my recommendation.
I'm gonna go contemporary and relevant to who I'm talking to right now, and that's you, Patrick. So a while back, you sent me a box. You know, it wasn't around the holidays probably, but it was a gift. And in that box was a bunch of stuff from Sacred Plant Co. And one of those gifts is keeping me warm right now because my new podcast, my new recording area here is in a backyard shed, in my backyard shed, and it's 32 degrees out right now. So right now I've got this awesome big mug, and I've got the wild chaga chunks from Sacred Plant Company. And so what I was thinking about this today as I was brewing this up. You'd mentioned before where you source your chaga from, and
Yeah.
it's Siberian, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what's crazy about that is that you don't really think about this much, but a lot of Siberia is coastal, and so you have like this interesting interface where you have a bunch of birch trees fairly close to the Pacific, and you've got Siberian tigers there. And so like, sure, you could go ahead and get your chaga from Minnesota or Canada or upstate New York or Alaska, or you could get it from somewhere where there's freaking Siberian tigers. So and get it from Sacred Plant Co. because that way you're supporting both Patrick and the people that you're directly getting your stuff from, and to send them some US dollars can be a heck of a good thing for them. So, and there's nothing more magical than hooking down chaga that was harvested from trees that maybe a Siberian tiger was like rubbing on or something at some point, just walking past. How cool is that?
That is pretty interesting. So I'm forgetting their name, but it's a couple who lives in Siberia, and like as you're saying that, I'm thinking, man, the risk involved, and I know it's not a huge risk, but if you run into a tiger, your survival chances are pretty small.
Yeah. Depends on when the last time they ate was, right? But I mean, it's a fascinating thing. And it's truly magical. And this is the perfect time of the year to get Siberian chaga too, because of the connection between Siberia and Siberian shamanism and Santa, right? And how there's some interesting connections there with that classic fairy tale mushroom has a red cap and the white dots, the Amanita Muscaria, which was traditionally shamanically used by these Siberian shamans, and they lived in the birch forests. So the people who are doing this are in proximity, so they have chaga there. they have the Amanita Muscaria. And so if you want to learn more, folks, about the strange connection between Santa and mushrooms and shamanism, you can do that. So essentially, though, the shaman would dress up to look like, to embody the appearance of the mushroom. So he would dress up in red and white garb. And there's stories that the shamans, I mean, this was like well documented by Russian anthropologists, I don't know when, like mid 1800s, but they would get into this inebriated state. And at some point during this, some of them would climb up on top of their yurt or whatever the structure is. And the structure has like a central pole and also a opening there to let smoke out from the fire that's keeping you warm inside. And the shaman would climb down this pole into this tent, yurt, whatever. So just like going down the chimney, there are all these like interesting little kind of cosmic giggles there, and strange parallels. So anyways, it's like the more you know about this stuff and the more you put into it, the more you're going to get out of it. Because here I am keeping warm with this chaga tea, thinking about how, heck yeah, some people risked life and limb and death by tiger to get this, and it makes it that much more delicious and healthy.
Yeah, that is something I've never thought about. I'm appreciating the heck out of that. The Amanita Muscaria, that is not a psilocybin mushroom. Is that true?
100%. Yeah, you don't really, people that experiment with that, they generally only try it once, it seems like. I think it was, I can't remember, was it Tom Robbins talked about how like psilocybin will, something like it weaves you into the tapestry or the web of the universe like a silver needle or something, like it's a sliver in, whereas Amanita Muscaria is like a wooden stake and a sledgehammer driving you in. So there's something like very, very crude about it, apparently. I've never tried that, but it's and I have no desire to. Reading the trip reports is plenty enough to have an appreciation. you read the trip reports, you say, that's fascinating, glad I didn't do that. But yeah, it is, it's interesting. I mean, I'm a reluctant sort of person when it comes to psychedelics and all of that. I don't know, I'm middle-aged, far too neurotic at this point, but it's always, sometimes I feel like an armchair quarterback when it comes to psychedelics, where it's like, it's very interesting. And I've had some profound experiences, but it's something I can't, or I choose not to revisit very often. But it seems to be stuck somehow connected to my life, because years ago I discovered a new species of psilocybin mushroom in Arizona, and that was a bizarre thing. So I think it's interesting to eat, like, especially for people. Yeah,
Joel, we got to take
there?
a moment. Yeah, we got to take a moment to appreciate the fact that you discovered a species of mushroom, you discovered a brand new species. That's
right.
Pretty freaking amazing. Of the things that have happened on the planet, that's probably one of the things that the fewest people have done.
I guess so. There's like a couple hundred species of psilocybin mushrooms out there. Maybe, a few new ones are discovered every year. And the kind that I discovered, ones that will grow in an undisturbed, natural forested habitat, those are really some of the rarest types that you can find. Those are discovered I remember talking to Paul Stamets about this years ago, and he said something like that is found maybe once a decade by the community. So yeah, it's like, I don't know. We can get into all that stuff. I think we've been focusing so much on the invisible path, well, on so many different things, but I think we've been going into a bit of like a doom spiral. And so it seems like, although it's necessary, right? There's some necessity there, but it's like, well, let's just turn it 180 degrees in a different direction. And instead of focusing on, how we're going to make it through, let's focus on different ways to make it through, but also some internal spaces and places that I guess consensus reality and the world at large really doesn't acknowledge and doesn't create space for, like it used to, I suppose, in when we were in more of a tribal type of setting, right? So once we moved to agriculture, that was all out the window. And then it was sort of rediscovered, after the Industrial Revolution in, late 1800s and then into the early and mid 1900s is when all of this started coming back. And then certainly you had the turmoil of the 60s and that particular counterculture revolution. But I think even for people that, what I think is interesting about this space is that you, like in a modern world, it is something that generally maybe people have contact with it in college, and then it will be written off after that. Like, well, yes, I tried this substance, some strange things happened. That was a long time ago. And, whatever, it has no relevance anymore. And yet it is, I really like what Terence McKenna says. He says that it is a true secret because it's the kind of thing that you can tell to people and they just frankly won't believe you. And they really don't want to hear about it. Right. I mean, if you want to be a raving holy man, lunatic, who has who has these incredible moments of serendipity and maybe even seeing into the future to some degree, well, you can do that. You can live that kind of life where synchronicities are like popping into your life at almost an alarming rate. But the price for that is your old identity. Like you can really go into that deep if you wanted to. It's waiting there for anyone who wants it. But it's sort of a terrifying space, at least to the ego and your identity, right? And so that's why I say I'm a reluctant psychonaut. I'm an armchair quarterback in a way, but somehow early childhood experiences drew me to it and eventually took me to that point up on the mountain in the Aspens where I'm staring down at this, little yellow mushroom that I know I've never seen before, but I know exactly what genus it's in, and know what that organism contains. And so it's a strange thing because I certainly didn't ask for that in a way. Maybe I did, but I don't know. We'll cover that later, I suppose.
So you said early childhood experiences,
yeah,
drew you. What were those?
So I grew up in Michigan, had a thoroughly Midwest upbringing, and had a typical sort of mycophobic upbringing, right? So the only mushrooms that I was aware of were, through like the folklore, or not even that, but just through what you hear from your parents and other people, are the ones that grow out in the forest, which will all kill you, and then the ones on your pizza, which are, they're okay. That's about it, right?
Yeah.
And so that was it. And then my older brother went off to college and went out west and came back. I remember he came back with these stories of magical mushrooms, and that was a strange thing to me. And the only time actually before that, the only time I'd heard about it was in like a middle school dare class, right? Like, and so the teacher said they're going over the range of all of the different dread drugs and compounds that will surely ruin your life because of the 80s hysteria over the drug epidemic or whatever. So then she mentions to the class, and it's in our little book that we have with all this awesome propaganda, there are these mushrooms and people take them and they hallucinate and they grow on cow poop. And so why would you ever want to eat something that grows on cow poop? And then to hear about this from my big brother, right? He's someone I look up to, or to some degree. So that was an interesting shift. And then those were just like these hints of something. And then my family moved from Michigan out to Washington State, right to outside of Seattle. And that was when I was in high school. And out there, it was just part of the culture of the high school kids. They all knew, not that all of them did it, but they all knew that if you looked in the forest in the right place, or if you looked in neighborhoods in the right places, well, you could find these little brown mushrooms. And they would, they were psychedelic, right? And for Gen X at that time, Gen X really had a romance, I think, with the counterculture and with hippies. And I listened to the Beatles and Pink Floyd and all of that, and so could you could feel something. Like, you listen to Magical Mystery Tour, you listen to Sgt. Pepper, it is just dripping with psychedelic energy, right? It's like a Dali painting of a clock. It's just, you can just tell, you listen to it, it just melts your face off with some kind of strange energy that having no experience of that psychedelic state at the time, I could still feel that there was something really profound that they were trying to communicate to everyone. And so, yeah, so in high school, in the Seattle area, and just in the Northwest in general, everyone knew about these things. But then I heard also, well, you have to be careful because there are lookalikes and they look just like the other ones that you want, but they'll kill you. They'll destroy your liver. And so at that point, I got really curious about that. And I decided, okay, I better go to a bookstore. I better get a book so I can learn the differences between these mushrooms. And for whatever reason, the book that I got was thicker than a Bible. And that book is Mushrooms Demystified. And if you're on YouTube, if you're on the YouTubes, you can see my copy here that I got when I was like a junior in high school. It's how many pages? It's 900 some odd pages, mostly black and white. And there's only a scant number of pages in here that cover psilocybin mushrooms, and it only covers maybe 5 species. But in the beginning here, there's a great little paragraph, or a great little page where the title of it is, "Hey man, do any psilocybin mushrooms grow around here?" And he has some really great stuff to say about the irony of the attitude of people that are generally hunting for these organisms, and how they're looking for people that are, purportedly looking to expand their consciousness or reach higher levels of consciousness. All they want to do is take a shortcut, and they don't really want to understand these organisms deeply. They just want the shortcut. And that really resonated with me. So thank God I got this particular book. And he has a poem in here written in the 60s, and I'm going to read that now. It's from Marge Piercy. Okay, we grew up in Disneyland with ads for friends and believed we could be made new by taking a pill. We wanted instant revolution where all we had to add was a little smoke. But there is no tribe who dance and then sit down and wait for the crops to harvest themselves and supper to roll over before the pot. And so that really resonated with me. And I think that really aligns with a lot of what we've been talking about on the invisible path, that what you get out is proportional to what you put in when it comes to your understanding of things and how you're able to respond to situations, and how you're able to appreciate things like this awesome chaga tea that I'm drinking, and thinking about knowing, okay, this is harvested in Siberia. There's tigers here, right? So what I got really from this book was, well, I better learn as many species as I can. I better learn as many different genuses of mushrooms as I can. I better understand this as well as possible, because if you don't, you can die. And that wasn't just a silly warning. Like, I found many times clusters of a species called psilocybin stuntii, and they're called blue ringers by the kids up in Washington. And the kids would, they'd want to fill brown paper bags with these things, but growing right next to them, like literally touching caps, would sometimes be Galerina autumnalis. And if you're colorblind, they looked exactly the same. I mean, exactly the same. And so that's a real problem. And there were certainly cases, in historically where young people would eat the wrong thing, and then they would be afraid to go to the hospital because they had, broken the law, right, by pursuing these mushrooms. And so they're afraid to go to the hospital, and then they die of liver failure, right? Like, this is tragic. Yeah. So anyways, I would see that a lot. And it's like, well, okay, you better actually be careful. So I spent a lot of time hunting for these things, but again, too scared to really do more than just dabble with them, essentially, right? Like, well, I'll taste it. But I had read enough by that time to have a real like respect, like an awful respect, a terrible respect for their potential. I had read the accounts by Aldous Huxley, and Gordon Wasson and Timothy Leary, and knew enough to be somewhat terrified, or at least have a deep respect. But have you read Doors of Perception? Mm-mm. So this is great. I mean, Aldous Huxley, he was like he was a well-respected, he still is, but I mean, he was a highly respected British author, and he famously wrote Brave New World, and came into contact with mescaline well before the counterculture. This was in maybe late 50s, but probably early 60s. I'm not sure when he first came in contact. It could have been late 50s, but he talks in there about this is so brilliant. He talks about how he's having this experience with mescaline, and how he finally understands some of this mystical Zen poetry that he's read, and how there's this one poem where a student asks the master, what is the Dharma body of Buddha? And the master says something like, it's the hedge at the end of the row. And so Huxley, he's outside in the garden, and he's looking at all of these plants, and my God, he sees it, right? He sees that whatever he's gazing at just exudes this profound significance that he could never access before. And maybe he could access it afterwards because of those experiences. But it's interesting how the West went through this journey of industrialization, and agriculture and then industrialization, all of that. And we lost this contact with these higher or more mystical states. And then I think it was Ram Dass talks about how it just makes sense that God had to come to modern humans in the form of a drug, in the form of a material substance, because we're such a mechanistic and materialistic society. And there's just something beautiful about that observation. Generally it's only, these kind of states I think are only generally tolerated in our society. We only tolerate like artists and madmen to access these states, or to be essentially mystics, right? And for the rest of us, it's something that you should ignore. You've got better things to do. You've got to pay down your debts, for Christ's sake. You've got to check in with the company. You got to badge in. You got to shop on Amazon, right? And so I think, I think it is such an interesting space to talk about, and not necessarily the whole psychedelic thing. People tend to categorize that or compartmentalize that, but what it is, it's essentially a doorway or an access point that is reliable and repeatable for people like us in the Western world, who have been so thoroughly deconditioned from anything subtle, profound, mystical, or spiritual in a way. And so because we've lost so many sensitivities, and because we have so much, we're just oversensitized because of the phone and everything, and we're deadened by that. And so it's almost like we do need a sledgehammer of some kind like this. It's like, maybe for some people, sitting on the mat and meditating for years is not a reliable enough way for them to get there, because they're too neurotic to just sit still, right? Like, I don't think I can do that. I have too much to do. Got the kids and the wife and the job and the side hustle and all this stuff going on. And so I'm probably just not good enough or wired well enough, or I'm not gonna give myself the chance to consistently dedicate time to meditating and getting there on the natch, as they say, right? But I've made contact with spaces, mostly just back in college, that still inform me to this day. That's a stunning thing, and that's what many people report. Thoughts?
Yeah. I think there's an awful lot to explore within this, and how we kind of put those pieces together is going to be really interesting, because I do think this topic has a lot of depth to it. I think since you kind of ended in this about our experiences in a detailed way, and I know I haven't shared any of this on the podcast, so it's new ground, which is unique after 3 years. I didn't get involved in any drugs at all until I was 30 plus years old. which is a pretty interesting flip of life experience. And we have really different perspectives on this. And I think one of the challenges that we're going to have in this podcast is the description of what goes on within your brain is something that's relatively hard to articulately share. But I do think I really want to get into this idea of meditation, and it's something we've touched on in the past. And I think I've recently put out a podcast just on the misidentification of meditation. And in case you don't listen to both feeds, let me just give a brief synopsis of that, which is essentially what people think of as meditation today is thinking with your eyes closed. And what meditation is an experience that begins when you completely dissolve any attachment to your physical being. And those two things are so markedly different that there are almost no people on the planet actually meditating. Almost everyone teaching meditation is teaching people how to think with their eyes closed. And what kind of ended my experience with psychedelics, with mushrooms, with whatever, was meditation. I realized that, so my historical mushroom experience, again, nothing before I was 30. When I was 35-ish, probably, I did a pretty good chunk of time, a year and a half, of microdosing mushrooms. And I did pretty deep dives during that time. And I had some interesting experiences, very interpersonal experiences, but they don't hold a candle to the experience I have in meditation. Like it is like there's a limiting factor in my experience with psychedelics, which is that I can't actually grasp the thing. The thing is something that I can see, but I can't embody it. Whereas with meditation, the only way that it is experienced is by fully embodying the thing. And the thing for me in meditation is a complete dissolvement of the physical body and a complete experience of oneness with everything around you. So that means that you experience your experience in meditation for me, my experience in meditation for me, I am the exact same thing as my house, as my planet, as my universe. And there's only one experience happening. Now, that is something that is really hard to communicate through words, but that is the most articulate way I've come up with so far. We talked a year ago probably about this, like, is the path of enlightenment worth it? And like the amount of work it takes to get down that path. And you said something beautiful and eloquent, and it just stuck with me. And it's an idea that I have been just continuously kicking around since you said it. And I think where you kind of started on this mushroom psychedelic talk was the shortcut, right? The shortcut was in the book. And I think that was a biological reference in many ways, right? It was like learn the biology of this organism you are wanting to consume, have like an intimate experience with the organism itself. But I also think that right now psychedelics are maybe at the height of their popularity in like normalized society. So the 60s, there was that fringe group, right, that got very into psychedelics. But now you can't go anywhere without someone having a conversation about ayahuasca within 35 feet of you. And when I hear those conversations, in a lot of ways, they make me sad, because most people's conversation about ayahuasca goes something to the effect of this: oh, I went on this special retreat in Costa Rica at this nightclub slash ayahuasca retreat center, and now I came back and everything's different and I'm enlightened. And I just don't think that's how it works.
Yeah. So,
but the way you phrased it, I think, was important, which was meditation isn't consistent enough, I think, is how you described it. So I want to dig in kind of on both sides of that perspective of like the consistency of result, maybe, or the ease of result, whatever it is.
so yeah, so you can sit for an hour every day for a month, and meditate, in air quotes, whatever. You can do your damnedest, and people are going to have radically different results with that. But you can give a bunch of people a hefty dose of mushrooms. If it is a large enough dose, they're all going to have a profound experience. It might be profoundly terrifying. It might be blissful. But this is something actually that was studied in the 60s by a graduate student who was I think it was through MIT, but he was consulting with Dr. Timothy Leary before he was fully, disgraced, before he became a holy man and was fully kicked out of Harvard and all of that. And it was the Good Friday experiment. And they gave half the participants psilocybin, and the other half, they gave them niacin. And the niacin was a pretty smart placebo, because it would give you some kind of physiological effect. You would feel this flushing effect with blood coming to the surface of your skin. And so, in Tim's description of it, first of all, he felt bummed because he got all of the, there was, instructors there, call them babysitters, whatever, that were taking part in this as well. And they were also part of the experiment. They were either given a placebo or psilocybin. And he knew, 15 minutes in, he's like, oh, shucks, I didn't get it. And then he felt pretty bored for the rest of the time, because he was helping people as well. But half the participants are just sitting there like, meh, whatever. And the other half are just like walking around this room, the experiment was held in a church. And they're walking around looking out the windows, just saying, my God, everything is so beautiful. And so you clearly knew who was having which experience. But it's interesting how today, we talked about this before, about how today psychedelics are wrapped up completely in Western values. So you're looking at microdosing. How can this help my productivity for my startup or the corporation I work for, right? Or you're looking at, which is fine, that's totally fine. Or it's, well, how can I heal my childhood trauma? And, that's another very Western way to look at this. Whereas how it was approached in the past, and I think how its true nature and its true utility is really about contacting some sort of mystical experience. And again, words, right? Like, words are just, they do not do any of these states justice at all. But that is the ultimate kind of soul healing positioning or framing of this thing, really, is that it's, when you get down to it, what it's really for, it's not for diddling the dose and seeing what you can do to be more productive or try to, heal whatever effed up things your parents did to you or whatever, or life did to you. it's about contacting something that is so otherworldly that it may not have any real relation to your job, your family, your 401k, your car, any of these mundane things in life, your status, your clothes, your 5-year plan, any of this stuff, right? It's something that is so otherworldly that it certainly is not for everyone. We've talked about that before with how you have Dunbar's number. I think that's who it is, Dunbar. A tribe is 150 people generally, and you've only got one shaman in a tribe, or maybe two. Maybe you have the shaman and then their apprentice. So it certainly isn't for everyone. But it's about something that is unlanguageable. And that's what I'm hearing from you too, right? When you talk about what meditation actually is, it's about something that you simply cannot put into English.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's definitely true. Which does make it real. English is a really important thing too, because English is such a like external language. The words that we have available to us in the English language are very external, and that adds a element of difficulty to describing things that go on within us that we can't even really sparse out from the actual language which we have been born into speaking. But the shamanistic component of this is a really interesting idea, because the shaman in a traditional society is like the most important figure, in that they're like the judge, the jury, the spiritual leader. Like they essentially fill all of the governmental roles. And they're also deeply experienced in the chemicals with which they are giving you, right? Like there's a real difference in someone who has grown up being a shaman's apprentice, and from 12 to 15 years old been working with this one plant chemical, teaching you the experience of what this plant chemical will be, or the person who's done mushrooms once and decided it's the greatest thing ever, and they come over to your house with a bag of mushrooms and they're like, let me tell you how to do these things. Here's the perfect dose for you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the fact that we don't have anyone actually guiding us really does make that a reality. And I know someone is listening right now saying, well, at my ayahuasca ceremony, I did have someone guiding me. And I would say, yeah, but that person is accepting money to guide you. They probably aren't the purest form of guidance that is available on this planet.
Just to play devil's advocate there, it's like, well,
yeah,
maybe it doesn't even matter. I mean, the most profound experience I had was that I've ever had with psilocybin was within college, and it was with something that someone grew, and it was dried out and made into a tea, and money exchanged hands, and the whole thing, right? Mm-hmm. And it didn't matter. It didn't matter because it still delivered something so incredibly profound. But I totally agree with what you're saying, that we've lost that framework. We've lost that container in the modern world. And yeah, every time I'm just going to have to like give Terence McKenna credit for some of these ideas, any idea that's his, because he really thought about this so profoundly. He mentioned in many talks about how there are people that can go through their entire lives with never contacting the psychedelic state. And you could also call that you could also say without ever contacting a mystical state, regardless of how you come into contact with that, let's just say. And yet it's something that is so like innately part of humanity's potential capacities. And for someone who's had contact with these types of mystical states, and to view someone who hasn't, it's almost like the way to think about that is someone who has gone through their entire life and not ever had contact with sexuality to any degree. It is just as a profound component of the human experience, and yet it is hidden from nearly everybody. And where it's not hidden, it's essentially trivialized. I mean, you look at, I remember, I don't know why I was so into just reading about it. I read Doors of Perception. I read Gordon Wasson's accounts. He was the person he was the first Westerner to participate in a shamanic ritual in the mountains of Mexico, ingesting psilocybin mushrooms with a curandero down there. And his descriptions of his experience are just so profound. And I remember reading that and contrasting that with what popular culture had told me about psychedelics, and was just thinking, like, my God, like the disservice done to everybody by popular culture describing this and denigrating it. It was just so enormous, really. I mean, I understand why it was done, because it really came about during the counterculture, and it was too much. It was just too much to lay these insanely powerful agents on top of everything else. And Gordon Wasson, he was a VP of public relations, I think it was, at like JP Morgan or some bank like that. Lived in Connecticut, a well-to-do, serious scholar. And he put together a team of people to go to Mexico, including a mycologist, and a photographer. And he brought his wife, which she had there's so many interesting connections there, because she was from Russia. She had a lot of Russian culture, and this is where they first sort of recognized these differences between Eastern European culture and Western European culture when it came to mushrooms, and how Western cultures just feared mushrooms and Eastern European cultures loved them for culinary reasons. But anyways, later he got funding through some nonprofit to fund these expeditions. He went down to Mexico multiple times, and later it was discovered, he did not know this, that the funding and the group, that this was all just like kind of a shell nonprofit or corporation that helped with the funding, and it was actually the CIA's MK Ultra that was funding his work. So the deep state is everywhere in everything, it would seem, but that didn't matter, because what he was able to bring back was a Christian rite. I mean, these people, the shaman, would pray to Jesus and to Mary as she is trying to heal her patient, while in this, peak shamanic state. And he wrote an article that went into Time Life magazine, Life magazine, in 1957, May 13th, 1957 is the issue. It's very expensive. You're going to pay $500 to get a copy of that today. But anyways, great descriptions in there about his experience. And he makes connections in there between this mushroom ceremony, this sacred ritual, and the Eucharist, right? The Catholic Church and the Eucharist and the body of Christ. And well, okay, you're gonna sip your wine and you're gonna eat this cracker and you'll feel nothing. Well, they were also ingesting essentially God's flesh. That's really, in some sense, how they're viewing this. But it delivered. It delivered for sure. And then, I mean, the shaman, she's believing that she's praying to and she's speaking with Jesus and Mary. And what a strange thing then for this article, for Gordon Wasson to put all of this together, to synthesize this, really have a profound understanding of it, and then just drop this on the world in this article. And that was another one of those watershed moments that helped kick off that counterculture revolution and that attempt at Western people, you know, to gain some kind of access to the ineffable, to have a shot maybe at seeing that hedge at the bottom of the garden row is the Dharma body of Buddha. And in the same way, you know, Huxley talks about looking at his corduroy pants. He's looking down at his corduroy pants and how they're just like a magnificent, you know, sculpture. They're just something so profound. All of the ridges and the folds in them, and how anything that he gazed at was just imbued with some sort of profound significance that he didn't have access to in any other way. And he was an incredible author and very deep thinker. So there's something really powerful there that, you know, first we abused sort of as we tried to figure out what the hell it was in the 60s. Then we outlawed it. Then we cartoonified it and said, well, it's just a, you know, it's a silly thing you might come into contact with in college and then you can forget about it. And now we're trying to make it into something productive. So that's where we're at. That's fine. It is what it is. Like I said, I'm a reluctant person. I think it's fascinating to think about. I'm terrified to ever try to approximate that type of dosage or that experience that I had in college. I think it's very forgiving with people when they're young and when you don't know anything. It might not be so forgiving when you're older. I don't know.
So I think that is interesting. There's probably something true to that. I will say I don't understand, and you said you fully understood why drugs are illegal. I will say I don't understand. Mushrooms is like such a wonderful example because you could have a mushroom garden in your yard. One little section of mushroom could be mushrooms that are consumable and that go in salads. One little section is mushrooms that if you consume any of them, you will die. And then one little section of mushrooms could be if you consume these, you might see the world differently. Well, it seems like if you were going to make one of those three sections of mushrooms illegal to grow, it does seem like the one that would kill you would be the one that people would be most concerned about. So I find it fascinating that is not the case. But I also think,
just really quick on that. I just mean, it makes sense to me. I think we talked about this before. It makes sense like why the Nixon administration just banned all of this stuff in one fell swoop. They just tried to ban all of it because they were so terrified by the counterculture at the time. And then what they sort of unleashed as well. Like they really helped sort of get these chemicals out there in a way. And then they had to reel that back. They were too freaked out by all of the protests and the domestic terrorism that was happening and all of that, by like the Weather Underground, all that kind of stuff happening. There are all sorts of crazy things happening in the late 60s, early 70s. So anyways, that's a segue to just clarify that.
Yeah. So I could see part of the problem as this group of people who popularized, you know, this Harvard educated really group of people who popularized psychedelics. I think if I review these from a very fair perspective, the way they brought them to the West was not with a lot of intention or protectiveness. They were pretty loosey-goosey with the like, hey, let's go on a ride and see what happens. And I think, you know, it's easy to say, oh, well, Ted Kaczynski's brain was ruined, but I don't know. I have no idea if being a part of the Harvard studies with Ted Kaczynski made him decide to blow things up. He may have blown things up no matter what, but I do think that there is, you know, we do think of these people like Ram Dass as these like brilliant thought leaders, and he's an interesting side or step. I think, you know, let me finish this thought and I'll bounce back to Ram Dass' end of life really quick. But, you know, there's this group of people who popularized psychedelics, and they did so, I think, with not a lot of like awareness of the potentiality of doing what doing so could do. And that is probably part of the path of why things became illegal. And I think had it been done with more intention, had it been done more shamanistically, the likelihood is that the experience the West has with psychedelics is remarkably different. And just as a brief throwback to the idea that it doesn't matter if you have guidance or not, because your experience could be profound, right? But it is a false equivalency, because you don't know what the experience would have been like with guidance. So we can't say it was just as profound, right? We can say I had a really profound experience, but there's no way to ever know how the experiences would have compared, because we can't have both experiences at once. But the people who have grown up with this experience as part of their culture have a very different relationship to these chemicals than we do. I think there's no doubt about the fact that the people who've grown up with this as part of their culture and who had some type of shamanistic guidance into the experience have a very different relationship with what goes on. So to wrap up this Ram Dass comment, one of the things you said earlier was something along the lines of Ram Dass talking about how he wanted this freedom from finances, in a way. Do you remember? I don't remember the exact quote.
I'm not sure. Continue though.
So one of the things that's always stuck with me about Ram Dass is that at the end of his life, he spoke very openly about the regrets he had for not having money, for not being able to financially take care of himself, and for being dependent upon his community to support his end of life care. And I don't know why that has stuck with me, but it is the thing that defines Ram Dass to me, is that it feels very much like at the end of this journey where he taught all these people, and man, our culture, Gen X, like Ram Dass is the Buddha. Like my group of people, if they're going to talk about spirituality, it will be in the first 5 sentences that Ram Dass has brought up. And I just think of this guy who lived this quote unquote spiritual existence at the end, regretting everything. And that is profoundly sad to me.
What do you do? I mean, there's man, I don't know. There's gonna be an overlap between the sacred and the profane, in a way. And so you just think that he did wrong by his community, essentially, because they had to help him.
He thinks that. I don't think it
Okay.
at all. I have no idea his experience, but he spoke openly about being embarrassed and sad about the fact that that was his reality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I don't know if I have any like really any profound thoughts about that. I mean, it's shoot, death. I
I
don't
have a
know.
lot.
Like
I have a
all I
lot of
can all
profound
I can
thoughts
think
on that.
about is like the time that I watched a cat being put down because it was at the end of her life, and it was uh it was just sort of a clumsy it was a clumsy thing in a way, right? Like there's not sometimes that's just how it is. Things are messy and ugly and clumsy sometimes, and that's why people joke about how like, well, when I get to the end, just take my wheelchair and just roll me off into the Grand Canyon or something. I mean, I don't know. I see it as that tension between the the sacred and the everyday, and a great, my favorite Ram Dass quote, which is that even God has to take out the trash. Um, I don't know. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I guess the moments that stick with me from his life are writings about earlier times. Um, when he, when he was like still high on mushrooms in the very early days before he was Ram Dass, and he shoveled the snow out of the driveway of his parents' house, and at like whatever 2 a.m. or something, and they were like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "I'm just free and happy, and I'm shoveling your driveway for you." And they just thought he was a nut. So, so I don't know. It's a different, I guess, a different moment. Different moments stick in my head for me, for him. Um, yeah, this touches back to like what we talked about previously about taking care of your elders. Um, yeah, I don't know. There's certainly, I mean, just like with everything, you get out of it really what you put into it. And I mean, I went in. I think I was a rare person going into it because I had read all of Leary's stuff about set and setting and how important that was. And but I don't know, what does it do? I could get very cynical about the whole experience as well, because it is interesting about how it runs through your hands like water. Like I'm sure when you come out of a very deep meditation, eventually maybe some words will come into your head to describe the experience. Well, that's the first sign that it's just running away from you and bleeding away, and you lose it at that point. Once you start to English it at all, that means you're coming down. You're trying to capture it in a way by wrapping it and trapping it in language. And that's the next step, right? Like you're in this profound state. It's unenglishable. It's uncommunicatable to anyone else. And then you try to describe it. You try to capture it. That means you've lost it, right? At least that's how I see it. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
I think it's. I think that is a very well articulated description of what I how I view the difference between meditation and psychedelics. In that, when you come out of a deep meditation, you are in a place that is meditative, and you can stay in that place for days, for weeks, for months, for years. Whereas with psychedelics, when the experience is over, you may have seen things, you may have felt things, but I don't think you embodied those things. I think there's a very distinct difference, and that is only my personal experience, right? Like anyone's experience, I can only attest to what I have experienced in my life. But I do think that sensation of running away, of the water of the water slipping through your hands and you trying to hold it as like deeply as you can is my experience with psychedelics. I can think of times, like there used to be a joke in the float tank, where like you had to do two things. If you had the thought that would like come through you, you either had to just be okay with never remembering it again, or stop, get out, and like write it all down, because you weren't going to get through an experience like that and still have whatever it was. And you know, people would talk about all the time, like maybe I bring in a waterproof notepad and this and that, or a waterproof recorder and this and that. And it's just like, yeah, but you're already done also. Like the moment you start creating whatever it was, you're not getting back into that space again either. So I actually, it's a really fascinating thing. And I feel like, I feel bad in an interesting way. You know, you were talking about how someone who's experienced psychedelics is trying to have a conversation with them about someone who hasn't. And it's like an impossibility, right? There's just not enough shared information to have the conversation. And I feel the same way about almost everyone on the planet in meditation. And when people are having the conversation with me about the equivalency of psychedelics and meditation, I think it's because the meditation they've experienced isn't really meditation, and that's not their fault. I think they've been taught that meditation is something completely different than what it actually is. But there's like a disconnect of ideas that just don't translate. But I do think that the experience that meditation offers is so vastly different that it is almost like having that same conversation. And I know that can't make any sense, but that is what it feels like to me. It feels like in that same way where you're like, yeah, it's cool. Like psychedelics are cool. But if you give me 30 days and an hour every day, like you said, hey, if someone gave you 30 days and an hour every day, I will change your life in a way that like you won't even, you can't possibly imagine.
I love that.
Does that make any sense?
I've only got an hour every day for Netflix, not for meditation. So
that's fair. That's
right?
fair.
Terrible.
I think that is true,
yeah.
But I think that is true. Like
That's
people
right.
are always like, hey, do you have a streaming service? And I'm like, I think I have a streaming service. Like, I'm pretty sure I pay for a streaming service, but I don't know enough to like tell you I for sure have a streaming service, because I might use it once a year. And like, there is like a reality of like, there's only so much time in every day.
Yeah, that's right. This is incredible. I love this. Yeah, I don't even know where to go with it. What's funny, like what like the humorous thing that comes to mind now is like two people arguing over which is better, psychedelics or meditation, which is more profound. It's so funny. It's yeah.
So I think
there's
it's
this
interesting.
great
Both psychedelics and meditation are likely at the height of their physical popularity, right? And again, when I say the word meditation, just know that I am referring to what people are doing, which is thinking with their eyes closed. But I think both of those things, I do think if we like took a populist poll, there are more people involved in each of those things than there has been at any time on the planet. And that is partly because the population is bigger than it's ever been, right? Like there's reasons for that, but I also think both of those things are having some type of a resurgence, and that psychedelics are having the resurgence tenfold, 100-fold, 1,000 times fold that meditation is having. So certainly people are drawn to the psychedelic aspect.
Well, it's getting so much research as well, right? It's getting so much attention with research, and they're finding these, fairly persistent, lasting changes in people that have a profound experience. And what I think is interesting is that people are pointing to the psychedelic as the thing that is doing the healing or the changing, but I don't think it is. I think what it is that it's the religious experience that molecule is permitting or allowing or occasioning to happen. That's really what it is. You can diddle the dose all you want, and that's not going to do it. But if you are brave enough or stupid enough to have a sufficient dose and have the right set and setting, the physical setting, the mental state, the intention, all of that, and you have that religious experience, whatever you want to call that, right? That does something to people. That creates a profound change. And some of those studies, at Johns Hopkins, it's maybe the change is they have less of a fear of death as they grapple with their stage 4 cancer, or maybe it allows them to see the harm they're doing to themselves, and so then they can quit their addictive relationship with alcohol or cigarettes or what have you. It is really that religious experience that is the key to the thing. And it seems like for neurotic, phone addicted modern people, taking a pill is the most consistent way to get there and the most efficient way to get there. And that doesn't mean I'm advocating for it, right? I don't care either way what people do. It's I guess these are just my impressions of what's happening right now with that space.
Yeah. Okay, so we're up over an hour.
But you're sleeping on the floor and you don't have a streaming service, so you're different than like 99.9% of Americans. So
I have a streaming service. I just don't know which one.
Yeah, see, exactly. So you don't ever watch it. So right.
Okay.
Yeah, we're there. We've gone over. If anyone's hung on this long, that's awesome.
So we've gone over, and like usual, we've only scratched the surface of a potential topic. What do you think about starting next episode with shared experiences? So just giving some form of description to the profoundness of a historical psychedelic experience.
Oh, sure. Let's do that. That'll be awesome. Yeah, let's do that.
You can say no.
Oh, totally. No, let's do that, because it continues on. And the whole progression, and maybe eventually we'll get to where I find myself up on the mountain, and randomly finding this new species, and then what's happened since then, I guess.
Well, there's nothing that I've ever wanted you to tell me more than the experience of how you actually found, the details of how you found this thing are definitely they're a thing that I want to hear about. So we have to get to that. We can't not.
Oh, we will. That's the craziest thing, because it's so darn rare. It's so hard to find up there, at least in my experience. That's probably because I'm not very good at finding these things, but it's hard to find. So to come across it randomly, it was or accidentally, right? It's quite a thing. But yeah, here we are. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy New Year, all that stuff. It's all coming up.
Happy Christmas, everybody! In 5 days.
My God. Yeah.
Dang it. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Joel. I'm excited to kind of dig deeper into the stuff we just kind of laid out, to get your full story on discovering a brand new species, and to see where we end up next on this path.
And I love this push and pull with meditation and all of that. This is great. This is great. And we're going to have to do something. We're going to have to do something ridiculous with some 2022 predictions, right? We've talked about that. We might have to do something there too.
Ooh, are we going to do that?
Just
that
to get
great.
We'd have to finish this other thing first, but then, because that could just be all. That's getting back in the mud. That's getting back in the weeds of the mundane chaos of our culture and what's happening. So, but that'll be fun too. We can we can do the yin and the yang of the subtle and the sacred and the profound, and then back to just predictions of what chaos awaits us.
Well, so I will just say, more than anything else, I want to do that episode because 2022, a year in preview, is like, it's there. It has to be done.
Yeah.
All right, Joel. Thank you. Heck yeah. Enjoy the rest of your Friday. I know this won't be Friday when this comes out, but we recorded on the 17th, y'all.
Hey, if you're listening on a Monday, make it your Friday. Get the feels.
Oh yeah. And check out Joel's setup. He mentioned that he has a new studio. He didn't call it studio, he called it recording space. But it's the thing that makes me jealous more than anything else.
Look at that.
Yeah. And little primal cold action up there.
Yeah, I got petroglyphs in the background. You gotta plug the Ball Science products.
Yeah.
Primal Cold, Optimus Red. Get them now. Make your 2022 awesome.
That's true. That's true. 5 days. They'll arrive sometime around Christmas.
Sure. We ship priority.
Heck yeah. Heck yeah. All right, man.
Hey, thanks, Patrick.